Then I made faces like the faces on the rocks, and I twisted myself about like the twisted ones, and I laid down flat on the ground like the dead ones.
Hey guys, today I want to talk with you about a horror novel by Ursula Vernon, also known by her pseudonym T. Kingfisher. The Twisted Ones was first published in 2019 and has been inspired by Arthur Machen's short horror story called The White People, written in the late 1890s. As per usual, we will start this review with a short synopsis, then continue to a non-spoiler review and finish this video with the spoilers. If you haven't read this book yet, then do not worry, I will make sure to let you know when the spoilers begin. The story is rather straightforward. We follow a woman named Melissa, or Mouse as she is called by her close friends. After the death of her grandmother, which by the way is not as sad of an event as you might have been expected it to be, she is forced to temporarily move to North Carolina by the request of her old and sickly father. Melissa's task is to clean out dead grandma's house and see if the property could be sold. She agrees to do that mainly because her father never really asks her for anything, so she consequently feels obligated to help, and also because she is in need of the money she would get from the sale of the house. So when she and her dog Bongo arrive to her grandma's house, she is horrified to discover that her grandma, on top of being an incredibly unpleasant human being to anyone with a pulse, in the last years of her life also picked up a fun little hobby called hoarding. The house is a complete mess. Every room is filled with garbage to an extent where parts of the house are impossible to reach. On top of that, the battery of her phone has decided to refuse to charge without going into flames. So now we have Mouse and her dog alone in a very secluded area of the town, right next to the never-ending woods. No phone, no friendly face in sight, just lots and lots of trash left behind by her grandmother. Not the most pleasant situation to be in, especially when she notices the weird things happening in the woods. I will come out clean right away. I have a complicated relationship with this book. I really wanted to love it. I did, honestly. And while it might feel that I am being a little bit too critical in this review about the book, which was overall good, I have to point out that the reason why I can't claim that I truly enjoyed this book is because the second half of the book just failed to meet the expectations which the first half of the book set up. Okay, so let's start with the things that I believe to be great in The Twisted Ones. Right from the get-go, the story hooks you in. The tone of the book doesn't remind me of any other horror books I have read. Most of the horror books tend to have this gloomy feeling, yet The Twisted Ones was filled with light-hearted humor. For quite some time I forgot that I'm reading a horror book and that I'm supposed to be on alert. Instead, I started imagining Melissa cleaning out her grandma's house, finding the love of her life in the process, and moving to a countryside where she can live surrounded by small but friendly community. The story also feels very personal as it is being told to us by Melissa herself. As soon as she starts mentioning the supernatural events, we know that this book is written like a memoir of things that she went through, and we know that whatever happens, she will survive it. Now, while I do not necessarily appreciate knowing that Melissa won't come to any true harm, as that decreases some of the tension of the book, I did truly enjoy reading this story from her perspective. Hearing her own words made it feel like me, myself, I am the part of this story too. Overall, Melissa as our main protagonist is great. She's funny and relatable, and her relationship with her dog feels insanely authentic. So what was my issue with this book, you might ask? It wasn't scary. I know different strokes for different folks, but for me the supernatural aspect of the book was the one that was lacking the most. And for a book which is supposed to be a horror novel, this particular aspect means a lot. For me, it never felt like our main character was in any actual danger. And more importantly, while the author tried to create some type of bigger explanation for the events that are occurring, the overall lore of the Twisted Ones felt disappointing and incomplete. And yes, I am aware that maybe I would have understood the lore of the supernatural in the woods a little bit better if I would have read The White People, a short story this novel was inspired by. But I do honestly believe that I should not need to look up a story written over a century ago for the monsters in this book to make sense. Anyhow, if after listening to the synopsis of this book you were intrigued, then go ahead and read it. It is definitely a not disappointing book. However, if you are looking for a story that will send the shivers down your spine, then do yourself a favor and maybe consider picking something else. And on that note, let's move into the spoiler territory. Since I already talked about the things I have enjoyed while reading this book, in my spoiler review, I want to concentrate a little bit more on the things that I wasn't that big of a fan of. First of all, let's talk about the effigies. Not gonna lie, the very first time Melissa saw an effigy, I found it kind of creepy. I would say that the whole event of her finding the effigy, realizing that the perpetrator of such a cult-like thing could be watching her, and the intensity of her need to find a way out of the woods and into the car felt legitimately scary. I was running with her through the woods in my mind, hoping that she would not turn around and see someone following. That felt like a real human reaction to a scary event, to something we all can relate to some extent. Have you ever walked in the dark street in the middle of the night and heard the footsteps of someone walking behind you? Of course, most likely the person behind you was just rushing home, like you. But in a situation like that, your brain shuts off for a moment and your survival instinct kicks in. So you start working just a little bit faster, or you move to the other side of the street, or you make a turn where you shouldn't have to, just to make sure that the said person is not actually following you. That's exactly how I felt reading about the first time Melissa saw effigy. The second time the effigy showed up felt even scarier. Waking up in the middle of the night just to see your dog in full panic mode, and only then notice the effigy standing in front of the bedroom window, looking at you with non-existent eyes. The scene was written so well that I could feel the panic coming out from the pages of the book. I think as many dog owners can relate, there is nothing creepier than having your dog stand and bark while looking into completely empty space, as if he sees something that you can't see. As you have already understood, the reasons why I found these two instances scary was because I could draw from my own experiences. Of course, I have never encountered effigies or any other supernatural beings in my personal life, but I could still find a real way to relate to her emotional state. And the book as a horror novel went just downhill from there. The initial fright of the effigies disappeared as soon as you, the reader, realize that they're being used as a way to introduce fear rather than to inflict any actual harm. The effigy of Melissa's step-grandfather comes every night. It looks creepy, bangs a few times on the door, and leaves her be. As the book progresses, we learn that the effigies are actually the ones who run the show, as well as that they have a way of multiplying as fast as rabbits. The realization of it had a completely different effect on me than I think the author intended. Instead of being terrified, I just felt confused. So you're telling me that this whole army of effigies have been out there in the woods for many years and they barely ever attacked anyone who was still alive. Instead, they collected pieces from dead bodies and trash humans left behind. And they only felt the need to attack because our protagonist invaded their territory. How is that different from pretty much any other predator animal living in the woods? The only legitimate threat these effigies pose are to the white people, whom they also worship. And yes, the fact that they keep Anna as prisoner is messed up, but in the end of the day, I just couldn't force myself to feel bad for her. She was introduced very abruptly, and we as the readers do not have any emotional connection towards her. And as for humor, it felt a little bit overused in the parts of the book that are supposed to be scary. Now, I know that some people deal with frightening situations using humor, but when I am reading a horror novel, I actually do want to be scared. And when our protagonists try to be funny every time something scary is happening, they do not allow for the tension to build. Another thing that I found utterly disappointing was the manuscript, written by the Cotgrave. It was just boring. The build-up to the Green Book was so good, and finding the manuscript was the second best thing to finding the actual book. However, the manuscript not only did not answer any of the questions me as the reader or Melissa had, but it was also just plain boring. I realized that the manuscript was a way for the author to incorporate parts of the original short story this book was inspired by. But I couldn't help but feel that this could have been done so much better. Lastly, once Melissa, Bongo, and Foxy are met by Anna and are taken through the stones to the realm of white people, that's where the book lost me completely. This whole situation started to feel much more like a fantasy adventure novel than a horror story. I could already imagine Melissa being elevated to the position of the chosen one, where she has to find and overcome the malicious regime of the effigies. And then, not surprisingly at all, we wrap up the whole encounter with the white people and the effigies by turning this book into an action movie. Escape from the prison, followed by the chase scene with the guns blasting, Anna's betrayal, and setting the house on fire. I could just see it all unfolding in my head. Mission Impossible, the rule of the effigies. For me personally, horror novels are scariest when they are relatable, and the supernatural aspect feels intense, yet is taken in moderation, not when they turn it into a high-scale action sequence. But that's just my opinion. What about yours?